Yet, almost everything meaningful in life begins awkwardly. The first speech, the first attempt, the first business, the first creative project, the first honest conversation. Courage is rarely glamorous in the beginning. It often looks messy, uncertain, uncomfortable. But growth belongs to people willing to look foolish temporarily. And perhaps that's another form of freedom, no longer needing to appear perfect before beginning. There's a quiet revolution that happens inside people who finally stop living for applause. They begin making decisions differently, not from fear, but from alignment. They stop asking, what will impress people, and start asking, what feels true? That changes careers, relationships, goals, identity, everything. Of course, society does not always reward authenticity immediately. Sometimes pretending actually brings faster approval. But temporary approval gained through self-betrayal eventually becomes emotionally expensive. The soul keeps score, and eventually people feel the cost internally. Anxiety, burnout, emptiness, numbness. Because humans are not designed to permanently live disconnected from themselves, there's a beautiful irony in all this. The people most desperately chasing love often struggle to receive it. Why? Because performance blocks intimacy. If someone only knows your mask, they do not truly know you. And being loved for a mask still feels lonely. Real connection requires vulnerability, honesty, imperfection, the courage to be seen authentically, which is terrifying, but also deeply healing. Imagine living one day without trying to impress anyone. No performance, no pretending, no unnecessary apology for existing. Just honesty. Just presence. Just being. For many people, that would feel revolutionary, because they have spent years emotionally acting. There's another hard truth. Some people will misunderstand your boundaries as rejection. But boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. And clarity protects relationships from hidden resentment. A person constantly saying yes while internally exhausted eventually becomes emotionally bitter. Healthy honesty prevents silent destruction. There's also incredible power in accepting that life includes suffering. Many people believe happiness means eliminating all discomfort. Impossible. Loss will happen. Failure will happen. Rejection will happen. Aging will happen. Uncertainty will happen. The goal is not building a pain-free life. The goal is building the inner strength to remain alive, connected, and meaningful despite pain. That is resilience, not emotional numbness, not pretending everything is fine, but refusing to let suffering completely close your heart. And maybe that is true courage, not the absence of fear, not invulnerability, but openness despite uncertainty. There's a scene that quietly repeats across humanity. A person reaches the end of life and realizes something devastating. They spent more time managing perceptions than actually living. More time worrying about judgment than pursuing meaning. More time trying to fit expectations than listening to themselves, and suddenly they understand. The greatest tragedy was never failure. It was self-abandonment. That realization can either break a person or wake them up, because it is never too late to begin returning to yourself. Never too late to speak honestly. Never too late to set boundaries. Never too late to change direction. Never too late to stop performing. The human spirit is remarkably resilient when given truth. And perhaps the deepest lesson of all is this: freedom and loneliness sometimes arrive together at first, but eventually authenticity attracts the right people. The people who love the real you rather than the role you perform. The people who respect your boundaries. The people who do not require your self-destruction for connection. The people who see your humanity without demanding perfection. Those relationships feel different, calmer, safer, more alive, because they are built on truth instead of performance. And truth is lighter to carry. So maybe the goal of life is not becoming universally admired. Maybe it is becoming internally free. Free from compulsive comparison. Free from emotional slavery to approval. Free from the prison of pretending. Free enough to live honestly. free enough to love authentically, free enough to disappoint people when necessary, free enough to choose meaning over image. That freedom is terrifying at first, because masks feel safe. But eventually masks suffocate. And one day you realize something beautiful. Being disliked by some people is not proof you failed. Sometimes it is proof you finally became real, and maybe the courage to be disliked is actually the courage to live. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but truthfully. Not because you became bad, because change disrupts familiar dynamics. A quiet person becomes assertive. A people pleaser starts setting boundaries. A dependent person becomes independent. And suddenly relationships shift. This confuses many people because they assume growth should make everyone happy. But growth often reveals which relationships were built on authenticity and which were built on convenience. And perhaps one of the bravest things a human being can do is tolerate misunderstanding without abandoning themselves. That takes enormous emotional strength, because humans instinctively want approval. But mature freedom means accepting that being misunderstood is sometimes unavoidable. Even history proves this. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, inventors, and leaders were criticized, mocked, or rejected during their lives. If they required universal approval before acting, nothing meaningful would have happened. Innovation requires courage. Authenticity requires courage. Truth requires courage. And courage often invites discomfort. There's a phrase hidden beneath many people's behavior. If everyone approves of me, then I am safe. But safety is not the same as freedom. In fact, excessive emotional safety often creates invisible prisons. People avoid risks, avoid honesty, avoid vulnerability, avoid growth. And slowly, life becomes emotionally flat. Predictable, but lifeless. Real living requires uncertainty. Think about every meaningful experience in life. Love, art, adventure, purpose, creativity. None come with guarantees. The human spirit expands through risk, not comfort alone. There's another deep truth many people resist. You are not the center of everyone's attention. At first, this sounds depressing, but it's actually liberating. Most people are too busy worrying about themselves to obsess over your mistakes nearly as much as you imagine. That embarrassing moment you replay for years, others probably forgot within days. That fear of judgment controlling your decisions, much of it exists only inside your mind. Humans dramatically overestimate how closely others are watching them, and this illusion creates unnecessary anxiety. Freedom begins when you realize you do not need permission to exist authentically. There's also wisdom in understanding tasks and responsibilities within relationships. Many conflicts happen because people interfere in responsibilities that belong to others. A parent tries to live through a child. A partner tries to manage another's emotions. A friend feels responsible for everyone's happiness. But you cannot carry another person's entire emotional world. You can support people, love people, guide people, but you cannot live for them. And when you try, both people suffer. Healthy relationships require emotional boundaries. Without boundaries, love becomes possession. Without individuality, connection becomes dependency. There's something heartbreaking about people who spend their entire lives trying to avoid criticism. Because avoiding criticism often means avoiding visibility. And avoiding visibility means avoiding impact. You cannot live boldly while remaining universally comfortable to everyone. A person speaking truth will upset someone. A person chasing dreams will be doubted. A person changing their life will face resistance. This is normal. Yet many people interpret criticism as proof they are doing something wrong. Sometimes criticism is simply proof you stopped hiding. Of course, humility matters. Self-awareness matters. Learning matters. But there's a difference between constructive feedback and living as a prisoner to public opinion. One helps growth. The other destroys identity. Imagine a musician terrified of negative comments, a writer terrified of bad reviews, an entrepreneur terrified of failure, a speaker terrified of judgment. If fear controls them completely, their gifts never reach the world. And maybe that's one of life's greatest tragedies. Not failure. Unused potential. There's another fascinating thing about human psychology. People often chase superiority because they secretly feel inadequate. Someone constantly boasting about achievements may actually fear worthlessness. Someone obsessed with status may secretly feel invisible. Someone desperate for dominance may deeply fear insignificance. That's why external success alone rarely heals insecurity. Because insecurity is an internal relationship. A person can become famous and still feel not enough, can become wealthy and still feel empty, can receive endless praise and still feel anxious. Why? Because no amount of external validation permanently fixes internal self-rejection. At some point, peace requires self-acceptance, and self-acceptance is not laziness. It's not giving up on growth. It's simply refusing to hate yourself while growing. It starts with a strange question. What if the biggest prison in your life has no walls? What if the thing exhausting you every day is not your job, not your family, not your past, but your desperate need to be liked by everyone around you? Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that almost every decision you make is secretly controlled by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing people, fear of standing alone. And now imagine what life would feel like if that fear disappeared. That is where this story begins. Not with success, not with motivation, but with freedom. Because deep down, most people are not living. They are performing, acting, adjusting their personality depending on who is watching, smiling when they want to scream, staying silent when they want to speak, carrying invisible chains made from other people's opinions. And the terrifying part? Many people stay trapped there forever. There's a silent epidemic in the modern world. People are drowning in anxiety while pretending everything is fine. They scroll through perfect lives online and feel smaller every day. They apologize for things that are not their fault. They overthink messages. They chase approval like oxygen. And somewhere along the way, they forget who they actually are. This is not just a psychological problem, it's a spiritual one. Because when your entire life depends on being accepted by others, you stop belonging to yourself. And maybe that's why so many people feel empty even after achieving what they once dreamed about. Because approval can never satisfy a starving soul. There's a story about a man who spent his whole life trying to make everyone proud. He worked hard, never argued, always said yes, always tried to be good. People liked him, they praised him, they called him dependable. But at night, when he sat alone in silence, he felt something terrifying. Resentment, not toward others, toward himself. Because he realized he had built an entire life around avoiding disapproval. He wasn't choosing his path. He was negotiating for acceptance. And one day, he asked himself a brutal question. If I remove everyone's expectations, who am I? Most people never ask that question because the answer is uncomfortable. We spend years constructing a version of ourselves designed for survival. A version safe enough to avoid criticism. We become experts at reading rooms, adjusting personalities, hiding flaws, pleasing people. But the more we betray ourselves for approval, the more disconnected we become from our own soul. And here's the paradox. The more desperately you want everyone to like you, the less alive you become. Because courage and approval rarely walk together. Every meaningful life requires disappointment. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will judge you. Someone will dislike your choices. And if your happiness depends on universal approval, you will spend your entire existence emotionally imprisoned. Think about how many dreams die because of this. A person wants to start a business, but fears relatives laughing at failure. Someone wants to leave a toxic relationship, but fears being called selfish. Someone wants to pursue art, music, writing, or a different career, but fears society's judgment. So they stay small, safe, predictable, and slowly miserable. What makes this tragedy worse is that people often believe their past permanently defines them. A bad childhood, a heartbreak, failure, trauma, embarrassment. Many people treat their past like a life sentence. I am this way because of what happened to me. But imagine two people who both experience the same pain. One becomes bitter and broken, the other becomes compassionate and strong. Same event, different meaning. That changes everything. Because maybe your experiences do not control you as much as your interpretation of them does. There's an invisible danger in identifying too strongly with suffering. Some people unconsciously build an identity around being wounded. Their pain becomes their personality. Their excuses become permanent shelter. And while compassion matters deeply, there's also a hard truth. At some point, healing requires responsibility, not blame. Responsibility. Those are different things. You may not be responsible for what happened to you, but eventually you become responsible for what you do with it. That realization is both terrifying and liberating. Because if your life is not predetermined by your past, then your future is still open. And freedom can feel scary to people who are used to emotional chains. There's another strange thing about human beings. We often choose familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. Why? Because pain we know feels safer than uncertainty. That's why people stay in toxic environments. That's why they repeat destructive patterns. That's why some people sabotage happiness the moment it appears. Because deep down, the unknown feels dangerous. And courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving anyway. One of the most dangerous lies society teaches is that your worth comes from outperforming others. From childhood, people are ranked, compared, measured. Better grades, better looks, better salary, better lifestyle. Life quietly becomes a competition, and competition creates a hidden poison: inferiority. No matter how successful you become, someone will always appear ahead of you. Richer, smarter, more attractive, more famous, more accomplished. So if your value depends on comparison, peace becomes impossible. Imagine climbing a mountain believing happiness waits at the top, only to discover another mountain behind it. That's how many people live, constantly chasing a finish line that keeps moving. And social media has turned this into psychological warfare. People compare their behind-the-scenes pain to other people's highlight reels. They see luxury vacations but not loneliness, smiling faces but not anxiety, achievements but not emotional exhaustion. And slowly they start believing, I am falling behind. But life was never meant to be a race. A flower does not compete with the flower beside it, it simply blooms. A tree does not feel inferior because another tree is taller. Only humans torture themselves with comparison. And maybe true confidence is not thinking you are better than others. Maybe true confidence is no longer needing the comparison at all. There's incredible freedom in realizing you do not need to win against anyone to live a meaningful life. You only need the courage to become yourself. But that sounds easier than it is, because becoming yourself often means disappointing people. There's a painful truth most people eventually discover. The moment you stop living for approval, some people become uncomfortable. Why? Because your freedom reminds them of their own fear. When you stop constantly apologizing, when you set boundaries, when you stop explaining every decision, when you choose authenticity over performance, some people interpret it as arrogance. But often it's simply self-respect, and self-respect is dangerous to people who benefited from your lack of it. There's a scene many people experience at least once in life. You finally say no to something draining you, and suddenly the people who loved your kindness become angry. But it was never kindness they loved, it was compliance. Real kindness does not require self-destruction. You are not obligated to sacrifice your mental peace just to maintain someone else's comfort. That realization changes everything, because many people confuse being needed with being loved. They become emotional servants to others, hoping usefulness will earn connection. But relationships built entirely on pleasing others become emotionally exhausting. You lose yourself trying to keep everyone else happy, and eventually resentment grows. Quietly, slowly, until one day you realize you have abandoned your own life. There's another powerful idea many people avoid because it feels uncomfortable. Not everyone will like you. And that's okay. Seriously. Think about it. You can be honest, kind, intelligent, genuine, and still be disliked by someone. Why? Because people do not see reality objectively. They see it through their own wounds, insecurities, expectations, and beliefs. Someone may dislike your confidence because they fear their own voice. Someone may resent your ambition because it exposes their stagnation. Someone may judge your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. You cannot control this, and trying to control it will destroy your peace. One of the greatest emotional breakthroughs in life happens when you stop asking, "How do I make everyone accept me?" and start asking, "How do I live honestly?" Those are completely different lives. The first creates anxiety. The second creates freedom. But freedom comes with loneliness sometimes. That's the price people rarely talk about. When you stop pretending, some relationships fade. When you stop shrinking yourself, some people pull away. When you stop performing, some audiences disappear. And it hurts, because humans naturally crave belonging. But there are two kinds of loneliness in life: the loneliness of being rejected by others, and the loneliness of abandoning yourself. The second one is far more dangerous. Many people are surrounded by others yet feel emotionally invisible because they are loved only for the mask they wear. Real connection begins the moment performance ends. There's something deeply tragic about modern life. People know more about branding themselves than understanding themselves. They carefully design online identities while remaining strangers to their own hearts. But the human soul cannot survive forever beneath performance. Eventually, anxiety appears. Burnout appears. Emptiness appears. Not because you are weak, because you are divided against yourself. There's an important difference between confidence and superiority. Superiority says, "I matter more than others." Confidence says, "I do not need to prove my worth." Those are worlds apart. People trapped in superiority constantly need validation. They need to feel above someone else to feel secure. They boast, compete, dominate, criticize, but internally they are terrified, because superiority built on comparison is fragile. Real confidence is quieter. It allows others to shine without feeling threatened. It does not need constant applause. It is rooted in self-acceptance rather than competition. And perhaps that's one of the hardest lessons in life. You do not become free by becoming better than everyone else. You become free by no longer needing to. There's also a hidden addiction many people never notice: the addiction to victimhood. Now, this is delicate because suffering is real, pain is real, injustice is real. But sometimes people unconsciously cling to helplessness because responsibility feels frightening. If your entire life is someone else's fault, then you never have to risk change. You never have to face uncertainty. You never have to take ownership of your future. Blaming the past can become emotionally comfortable, but growth begins when excuses end. And that doesn't mean pretending pain never happened. It means refusing to let pain become your identity. Some of the strongest people in the world are not those who avoided suffering. They are those who refuse to become permanently defined by it. There's another powerful shift that transforms relationships: understanding the difference between helping and controlling. Many people think they are helping others when they are actually trying to control outcomes. Parents controlling children for their own good. Partners trying to fix each other. Friends giving endless unsolicited advice. But real respect means allowing others the dignity of their own choices, even their mistakes. That's difficult because humans hate uncertainty. We want people we love to choose correctly. We want guarantees. But control disguised as love suffocates relationships. People do not grow because they are forced. They grow because they choose. And sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing someone to walk their own path, even when it scares you. There's also a deep misunderstanding about happiness. Many people imagine happiness as a permanent emotional high. Endless excitement, endless positivity, endless success. But that's fantasy. Real happiness is quieter. It's the ability to live honestly, to sleep peacefully without pretending, to experience meaning even during difficulty, to feel connected rather than admired, to contribute instead of constantly proving yourself. And contribution changes everything. One of the fastest ways to become miserable is obsessing over yourself all day. How do I look? What do people think? Am I successful enough? Am I attractive enough? The mind becomes a prison of self-consciousness, but meaning often appears when attention shifts outward. When you help someone, encourage someone, create something useful, support a community. Suddenly life feels bigger than your insecurities. Humans are wired for connection and contribution, not endless self-obsession. That's why some wealthy people remain deeply unhappy while others with far less feel fulfilled. Because meaning and status are not the same thing. A person can be admired by millions and still feel empty. And another person can live quietly yet experience profound peace. Modern society worships visibility, but visibility is not fulfillment. There's a powerful image to think about. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones. Every stone represents someone else's expectations, your parents' dreams, society's standards, past criticisms, fear of rejection, comparison, need for approval. Now imagine carrying that backpack every single day for years. Eventually you forget how heavy it is because it becomes normal. But the moment you put it down, you realize how exhausted you truly were. That's what emotional freedom feels like. Not becoming perfect, not becoming fearless, simply becoming lighter. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight. Most people spend years building psychological armor. You cannot instantly remove it. There will be moments where you relapse into people-pleasing, moments where criticism hurts deeply, moments where rejection feels unbearable. That's human. Courage is not perfection, it's practice. And every time you choose honesty over performance, you strengthen something inside yourself. There's another painful reality people eventually face. Some people only love the version of you they can control. The moment you evolve, they resist. That changes the entire emotional experience of life. Growth driven by self-hatred feels exhausting. Growth driven by self-respect feels meaningful. There's also a dangerous cultural myth that suffering automatically makes people noble. It doesn't. Suffering can make people compassionate or bitter, wise or cruel, open-hearted or defensive. Pain alone teaches nothing. Reflection does. Responsibility does. Meaning does. Some people transform pain into wisdom. Others transform pain into permanent cynicism. And the difference often lies in whether they remain trapped inside the past or choose to create meaning beyond it. That is incredibly important, because your future does not need to be emotionally chained to your history forever. Humans are storytellers by nature, and the story you tell yourself about your life shapes your experience of it. If your story is, "I am damaged forever," you will behave accordingly. If your story becomes, "I suffered, but I can still create meaning," everything changes, not instantly, but deeply. There's another subtle trap people fall into: living for image rather than reality. They care more about appearing successful than actually feeling fulfilled. So they chase status symbols, applause, visibility, but internally feel disconnected and exhausted. It's possible to build an impressive-looking life that secretly feels emotionally dead. And many people realize this too late. After years of climbing ladders they never truly wanted. That's why self-awareness matters more than imitation. Not everyone wants the same kind of life. Some people genuinely value ambition and leadership. Others value peace, family, creativity, or simplicity. Neither is automatically superior. The danger begins when people unconsciously inherit goals from society without questioning whether those goals actually align with their soul. A meaningful life is not copied, it is created. And creation requires courage because authenticity has no guaranteed roadmap. There's a beautiful freedom in accepting ordinary humanity too. Modern culture pressures people to become exceptional constantly. extraordinary career, extraordinary body, extraordinary influence. But the obsession with being extraordinary often makes ordinary moments invisible. A quiet dinner with loved ones, a peaceful morning helping a stranger, creating something small but meaningful, watching rain fall outside a window. Life is happening there too, not just in dramatic achievements. Many people postpone happiness waiting for some future version of life. When I succeed, when I become rich, when everyone respects me, then I'll finally relax. But life keeps moving while they wait, and sometimes decades disappear chasing a destination that never emotionally satisfies them. This does not mean ambition is bad. Ambition can be beautiful, but ambition without self-awareness becomes endless hunger, and endless hunger can consume an entire life. There's another lesson hidden inside human relationships. People cannot give you permanent worth. They can support you, love you, encourage you, but if your identity completely depends on external validation, relationships become emotionally dangerous. Because every disagreement feels like annihilation. Every rejection feels like proof you are worthless. Every criticism becomes unbearable. That's too much pressure for any human relationship to carry. Inner stability matters, not arrogance, not isolation, inner grounding, the ability to remain connected to yourself even when others misunderstand you. That is emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is rare because it requires discomfort. It requires facing loneliness sometimes, facing uncertainty, facing criticism, facing your own insecurities honestly. Most people avoid this work because distraction is easier. Entertainment, scrolling, noise, constant stimulation, anything to avoid silence. Because silence often reveals truths we spend years escaping, but healing usually begins there, in honest silence. There's something else deeply important. Forgiveness, not as weakness, not as pretending harm never happened, but as releasing emotional poison. Because resentment creates invisible chains between you and the people who hurt you, and sometimes the person suffering most from old anger is you. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Some relationships should end. Some boundaries must remain. But carrying hatred forever slowly damages the person holding it. Freedom sometimes means releasing the emotional grip of the past. There's also wisdom in accepting imperfection. Many people delay action waiting to become flawless first. Perfect confidence, perfect timing, perfect skill, perfect certainty. But perfectionism is often fear wearing elegant clothes, a way to avoid vulnerability, because imperfect action risks judgment.